Anybody? I'll take one more sip of coffee. You don't have to. I'm just wondering.
I had a thought, and I was thinking about food deserts and people without transportation, how difficult it would be for them to go to the grocery store and buy healthy food and bring it home and all of that. And I was wondering about kind of figuring out the distance, like based on where I live, between different stores, and actually looking at the bus schedules and figuring out how much time it would take me per week. Because then if I was riding the bus, I wouldn't be able to get like a car full of groceries either. I'd have to go several times in a week.
Right.
And kind of figuring out like how much time it would eat up if I didn't have reliable transportation in order to get groceries.
That's a cool idea. You might want to pair that with the food desert idea.
Okay.
Because basically we'd be looking at if somebody or you could do your own situation, and then maybe you could look at something like in Denver, or anywhere actually around here, but how far do people in certain areas have to travel to find a real grocery store? What's that look like? Because that's really what a food desert is. It's not like there's no food there. It's just that you have access to a 7-Eleven because you wouldn't have to take 3 buses and take 3 hours of your time. You know what I mean? So now you get no selection, 3 times the cost, no access to really quality food. What's that look like for folks? It makes a tremendous impact, I think, on because I have a lot of friends in Chicago, and that's that city thing amongst a lot of my friends. I mean, they're eating at gas stations all the time because that's what's around. It's crazy. I mean, from my perspective anyway, I'd be like, wow, because with traveling with the band, now we don't go on the road anymore, but traveling with the band is a lot like that. You're getting out of the car at gas stations, so what do? And of course, since Julie works at Vitamin Cottage for a long time, I would have to actually go grocery shopping before a weekend of shows and get as much food as possible, knowing that restaurants were going to be sketchy, even if once we did get to a restaurant, because I just don't eat bar food, greasy food. I mean, mostly organic food, and then also, when would it be a real grocery store instead of, a gas station or something like that? I think you might be able to combine those things, but I do like the idea of your cat playing guitar, which looks like it's about to happen right now. Do it, Freebird! Little Mittens played Freebird for all of us at 8 a.m. That would be sweet. Sorry, I know it's probably not Little Mittens, but I was thinking maybe your cat also might have a rap name, Lil Mittens. And we'll spell mittens with a Z. Anyway, all right, everybody. Let's look at these questions. All right, top hat questions. And did I open up? I just opened up one question this morning, but I'll be opening up more questions for you to answer, for on Tuesday or whatever. But let me just look at this first. Okay, so we had a couple. And these two were, what comes to mind when you hear the word, morning storm? What comes to mind when you hear the word rich? What comes to mind when you hear the word poor? I'm just going to scroll through our list. And what I'm going to ask you, I know how many there's 22 of us here. So at least, keep these lists in your mind, because I'm going to ask you after I read through them, if you would make some sociological observations. We're 9 weeks in. Everybody's a professional sociologist here. We're not as trained as Ewa or Verena, but you do have some tools, right? Some paradigms, some lenses, some chapters underneath our belt to really be able to think about this through the sociological lens. And that's what I want everybody to do all semester long, right? I mean, how can we see these things and understand them? So when I read these lists, I think they'll be different in ways that we will pick up because we're sociologists. So let me read this. All right, what comes to mind when you hear the word poor? Poverty, homelessness, lacking money, hardworking, oppressed, disadvantaged, someone who can't afford to eat or pay for housing. Unfortunately, minority groups, disadvantaged, less fortunate, closer to happening than most may seem, or than it may seem to most. Unlucky, socioeconomics, hunger, not being able to afford basic necessities, majority, struggles, lack of money for necessary resources, homelessness, feeling powerless, not being able to pay by the things you need, no money, oppressed by the rich, struggle, not wealthy, last one, my upbringing. All right, So there's our list when you hear the word poor. And now let's look at what comes to mind when you hear the word rich. Let me shut that off. Oh, there we go. Big house, easy life, fast cars, unlimited access, someone with an extreme amount of money, fancy suit, someone who is well known, somebody that has something in abundance, white, lucky, way too much wealth, a lot of wealth, whiteness, excessive wealth, white men, envy, eat the rich, being able to afford more necessities, fortunate, mansion, well off, people who have a lot and can buy luxury goods, opportunity, eat the rich, twice, uneven, people with a surplus of money, majority, white, taxes, exploitive, privileged, people who are able to pay their bills without needing to worry their funds are not disappearing as soon as they spend their money, someone who can identify with their success, a gated community, or by donating millions to organizations. Wealth often defines the rich in my eyes. Okay, good. All right, so make an observation about those two lists. What do we think about the poor? How do we feel about wealth or wealthy? What assumptions do we make? All right, I'm gonna drink my coffee. I'm gonna leave this to you for a second. What do you think? Anybody?
I find it interesting that for the rich, a lot of the things that came to people's minds were like material things, like fast cars and big houses and stuff. It was more about the things they have rather than who they are. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Okay, good. Yeah, a lot of mansion is here. A lot of material things that were listed. Yeah. Thoughts about either one of the lists? We can't always make Allie talk at 8 a.m. in the morning, although I appreciate it.
Yeah, like kind of what Allie was saying is that like the poor is like they're more categories like the lack of what they have, like the lack of resources, the lack of necessities, and then the rich is like what they have, like so it's like comparing like the objects that they have.
All right, so yeah, uh, yeah, resources and what people have, good, both of them. Although I see struggle here for poor, feeling powerless. You know what comes up a bunch? Homeless. That was number one for my other class that had us over 200 people. That was like that overwhelmingly was the number one, and it came up several times here. What are some assumptions that we make about the homeless or the rich? I think that might be good. Like, what kind of assumptions do we make based on whether we perceive people to be wealthy or poor? What do you think? Or homeless?
Usually with poor or with homeless people, I think that some people tend to associate them with either having a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue.
All right. So yeah, some that there must be, if you're homeless, some type of, and to a certain degree, there are some of that when we look across the board. But obviously that's a stereotype as well, right? Not everybody, and I think one of the other assumptions is that they choose that, right? Which, if you talk to segments of homeless populations of homeless folks, is oftentimes not the case, and sometimes it is, right? That people don't want to have all that car payment, mortgage payment, live by these set of rules. So interesting. Yeah. One thing I experienced years ago, about 8 years ago, our band was playing in Old Town Square in Fort Collins. You know, they had the stage now, but they used to have another stage. This was a while back. And a lot of homeless folks would watch those shows because they're free and they're downtown. And I remember a guy came up to me and he was 65 years old. This was about 8 years ago. And after the show, he took off his gold chain and he like went to give it to me. And he said, "Here you go. That music was awesome." And I was like, no, man. I was like, they already paid us. But let's sit and talk. So we sat down for about 45 minutes and we talked. And turns out that this guy, ex-military guy, served in maybe it was Korea, and his wife had passed about a month before that. He lost all of his benefits, lost his home, and was homeless for the first time at 65. And he said, "You know what's crazy is that I really owe my life to the homeless population in Fort Collins because they taught me how to survive. Right? So I don't think that what we think of often when we think of homeless, we think of poor, we think of lazy. And I see Sophie said that, of course, not true always, but a stereotype. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, there's the thought of what if you were 65 and homeless for the first time? Not at all by your choice, with on disability, but not getting a check, your partner who was done for, now here you are. How do you just survive? That becomes a much, to me, I can't even imagine that scenario, but I know that we assume so much. Now it's hard to go sit down and have a conversation with people you don't know because of just the sort of pandemic piece. But when talking to homeless populations of people, it's really, really interesting because it is a wide ranging, instead of you're all lazy and you choose to be this way and you're all, have mental illness, it's quite a broad range that I think that, sometimes we don't perceive. Many people can be judgmental and stereotype. Recently learned hobo means homeward bound. Changed my perspective. People are on a journey, right? I wish we could be kinder. Certainly. And there's some, there's some things on both these lists that aren't all that kind, and I think that people do feel negatively towards people with wealth. We'll look at whether people say that they thought they justifiably earned their wealth or not. But I think one of the differences is like we'll talk about next chapter with racism. Sure, there's reverse racism, but the people who are minority folks don't have a proportionate share of power to change the structure to enforce any of that. Like they might make you feel bad by yelling at you in a scenario. There's a reverse racist scenario, but they're not going to take that, change the system so that your health statistics mean that you die 10 years soon. You know what I'm saying? They're not going to rearrange the system because they do not have a proportionate share of the power. So it's really interesting when we look at this. All right, what else? I think there's there's at least one other thing between the two lists that I noticed that wasn't on one list, but was on the other. Anybody pick that up?
I find it interesting that homeless was on the poor list so often because, and I guess I used to feel like poor wasn't really poor unless you didn't have anything. And I think people are starting to realize in our country more that there are so many poor people, and it doesn't necessarily mean you live on the street or you have nothing, but you're poor,
Right.
And it's just interesting to me that that's the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people, because being poor encompasses so many more people than just the homeless. And I don't know, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and I think that came up on our list a couple times here, and then definitely in the other class, which was hardworking. A lot of people put poor, hardworking, got 3 jobs, can't make ends meet. And I think that's what we've seen. Again, when we talk about stratification, I'm not thinking things will be equal. People earn and have transmitted to them and all sorts of things, but I don't think things need to be like this or like this, right? So when we talk about this inequality, it's really, should that many people now have to work 3 jobs just to survive? And how does that impact your life? Well, let's talk about that. Airline pilots frequently have to have side jobs like teaching or walking dogs. I know this sounds strange. I had a good friend who was an airline pilot. How would you feel? It's different that the cook in a restaurant or that your teacher has to get an extra job on the weekend. How do you feel about your airline pilot being pissed off because they had to work 4 jobs and they're not sleeping? That's a whole different set of circumstances, right? When we start to talk about that. So it's the kind of poverty we're seeing as well. And that wouldn't be the stereotype that's put forth out there, I think, by maybe structural functionally would say the institution. And that is that people are inherently lazy and you didn't pull yourself up by your bootstraps, so you don't have a good job. You didn't sink yourself into $150,000 worth of debt in college, so you didn't earn that. But there's all sorts of types of caste system, class system, and we talk about slavery, but what about economic slavery? How hard is it for young people to find a job when they've got $150,000 of debt exactly in their field when you got to pay rent? I think that compromises people as well. Good. So people are hard. I think the poor are very hardworking, but now you need more jobs to even not be homeless, which is why we've also seen such a huge uptick in, the homeless population, and not just here in Fort Collins, but it's so different than it was 20 years ago. I never saw in my hometown or here lines outside of the shelter, the food bank, like this, people standing on corners, and it's become a much more present peace. So what are we doing about that, I guess, is something else we'll talk about in this chapter. All right, one last thing about both lists. There's one thing that made it to the rich list that didn't make it to the poor list. I'm looking for one specific thing, and I'll drink my coffee, and if nobody picks up on it, I'll give it away. But what do you think?
I'd say the one thing that made it to the rich list was definitely the whiteness. On the poor list, you didn't really have an association with race or color as much, but the rich list, there was definitely a good portion of whiteness on there.
Yeah, same thing yesterday with the list, which was interesting because now this is polling like, almost 250, 280 people. And so, yeah, color or a suggestion of color didn't really, I don't think, made it to the poor list. And white or whiteness, the condition of it, certainly made it to the rich list. Yeah, and of course, we'll look at that. We'll look at what that means. But interesting that we associate maybe, and maybe that's just, we're thinking in terms of diversity here in this class, and that's why we would answer that way. As far as why people were mindful maybe not to say poor people are going to be people of color. We know statistically that might be true, but didn't necessarily make that list. Okay, let's look at the next question. What comes to mind? In general, the rich people of the world have justifiably earned their wealth. Almost nobody a couple people strongly agree, a couple people strongly disagree, and most of that really in the middle. Like either people just like moderately agreed or moderately disagreed. Not the best rubric, to be honest. And the question is vague on purpose, but what did you answer? Did you answer that you feel that the rich have generally justifiably earned their wealth, agreed, or disagreed? What was your answer and why?
The answer that I put, I think, was moderately, because I don't know if anyone else kind of read it this way, but when I read the question, what I usually see nowadays is I feel like the only way to like really get places is through connections. So that's why I just kind of put like moderately, because I mean, nowadays if you have connections, you can really get anywhere or just have like a better setup.
And we've heard that, right? Like it's who you know, right?
Yeah,
but check
exactly.
this out. I can only see, I'm going to read the names. I can only see Allie, Ashley, Aaron, Eva, Ewa, and Eva. 2 Evas out of 5 people. Wow, that's all right. But so you either thumbs up if you're here. There's 22 of us, okay? But let me know how many people here have ever gotten a job because in part of somebody they knew. Raise your hand now. Yeah, I mean, it's almost all of us, right? Not quite. But I think that, whether that's just some high school job and your parent's friend is like, hey, I got it, who you know and how you do that makes a huge difference. So, here's a book about poverty. Oh, Food Desert Social Stratification recommended by my professor when I was an undergrad. If you'd like to read more. Oh, awesome. Oh, Living in Bootstrap America. Yeah, that's excellent. It is. And it's one of my least favorite analogies of all time. The pull yourself up by your bootstrap. Good. Okay, so some people in here went out and got that job on their own. Some people in here, and I mean, I'm thinking of the first job I ever had. I don't, so many. Well, yeah, it's like half, but there's got to be something in there. So I guess one of the focus things here, I'm going to sidetrack for a second, would be you're in college, make these connections. The author to my Soc 220 book is the dean of our social and behavioral sciences, Michael Carolyn. He's a good dude, and even though you're not in Soc 220, Michael Carolyn is somebody you should know. You should find his name, make an appointment with him, talk to that guy. Like, this is where you hang out with and get to know really well-connected, smart people. That's part of what you're paying for, and don't think it's not. You should be here like doing that and networking like crazy. So whether that's me, whether that's another professor, or whether that's people in other positions on campus, but I just think that it's an awesome time to not, like, you're earning who you know now. It's not just like, oh, I know that person. So who you know, or getting connected or hooked up with a job or something like from somebody you know, may not just be transmission of, oh, I'm giving it to you. It may be like you really forged a great relationship because you're an awesome, smart person with people, and now you are connected. That's a real thing, right? And sometimes it doesn't matter and people don't make those connections, and then they just still get that. And sometimes people don't make those connections and there's nothing. But right now I think would be a good time to make sure you're doing that anyway. The other one is split up relatively the same way. That's the student question. And I'm just getting to perceptions of wealth or poverty, like what do we think of, and what we think of the poor obviously has more impact than what we think of the rich, because people who are wealthy have resources to resist those labels. They're oftentimes in dominant culture, whatever that might be. Last one though here that I really like, and I think this is the one that we could talk about, and this is the one that's concerning to me, and that is most people could get ahead in the United States if they really tried. And my class the other day actually was looking at this from an angle that I never had before. So that's why I love, I can never have a class that's not reciprocal. Like you have too many experiences and too much valuable wealth of experiences and social experiences in your life to where it makes these discussions so much better. So most people could get ahead if they really tried. 8 people agreed and 23 people disagreed. Why? And it says a lot. It says a lot. My other class was split about this way. This is over twice amount of people. And maybe that doesn't apply to you. Maybe you're thinking of it for other people. So I also want to know how you're thinking about that. So most people could get ahead if they really tried. Only 8 people are like, yes. Seems to, that seems to be part of the linchpin of America, or at least our concept of it. And we'll talk about the American dream next time, as it's one of the questions. But I'm so curious as a sociologist at why more than double the number of people would be like, no, I disagree. Most people can't really get ahead. And maybe you weren't referring to yourself. Maybe you're talking about other people. Maybe you're thinking of groups of people, maybe college, whatever that might be. So I'm going to turn you loose now. Infinitely interesting to me. Most people could really get ahead in the United States if they tried. 8 no, or 8 yes, 23 no. So what do you think? Why did you answer that way, or what are your thoughts on that?
I said no because it's kind of what we were talking about earlier, how there's people who are like working 3 jobs, but they still like they're still like paycheck by paycheck to see if they can like meet their rent or like get enough food. So like thinking about it that way, because in the idea you think that if you could work 3 jobs, that's like giving you extra money and you could like get ahead. That's what kind of should be expected, but it's not the reality. It's like people who are working those extra jobs are doing it because they can't survive off of just one job.
Right. And at that point where you're working 3 jobs, it's interesting, right? Because you're coming at a perspective of, you would think that we would, 3 jobs, an extra job that would get me ahead, but that's just keeping me afloat. And I only have so many hours in the day, so like I literally can't get ahead, even though I'm, maybe doubling or tripling down on that. And of course that word it's vague here, ahead, but I think we all have an idea. You're either staying the same, you're falling behind, or you're cruising ahead a little bit. Okay, good. Other thoughts? What did you pick and why?
So I put that most people can't get ahead because I feel like most people is way too many people. I feel like there's definitely exceptions, and a lot of times like there are off chances. Like there are self-made millionaires and stuff. Those people exist for sure. But I don't know, I've just realized that like you kind of can have a lot of privilege from your family resources. Like I tutored this one kid who was doing really bad in school. I tutored him for like the SAT. I helped him graduate. His parents paid me way too much money. And he didn't get into any colleges, but they still set him up with an electrician like thing. Like he's still going to be making bank. He had these family resources that allowed him to graduate, that allowed him to like get a job path. And a lot of people don't have family that takes care of them in a financial way like that. And like that's privilege in its own way.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of privilege. Somebody even said something that I really didn't think about yesterday, and that was just having 2 parents that are alive versus no, like if your parents die early, or if the people that take care of you early are gone. Wow. And I hadn't even really, I'm thinking about that now. I'm 47. I mean, honestly, it's certainly much more tragic. And you miss all sorts of things if your parents are gone or pass early, and especially those lines to others, right? That would give you some sort of safety net or some sort of connection. And And that privilege isn't always bad. And then there's cases where it's so excessive that, I mean, here, let me try and help you graduate. Here, let me try and do this. Here, let me try and do that. Wait a second. Right? You know, and in certain families, I think that's great sometimes. I also know that I didn't come from that family. My parents were both teachers, didn't have much left at the end of every month. And it was like, you know, if you get arrested, don't expect us to bail you out. We don't have the extra money to do that. We're not showing up. And it was just a whole different, maybe generationally, as far as like, here's how much we're going to help you. Julie's mom was like, and 17 years old and 365 days, 18 years old, see you later, get out of the house. Like, so our experiences were very different. And so, yeah, even your connectivity to your family, do you have one? Much of one. What's that look like? Good. Good. And not all, we're not talking, look, all access and power and privilege isn't bad. My goodness, like we just like, that's never a point I want to get across here in sociology. I mean, some of that is important and necessary, and some of it you create for yourself. Like, and work towards, I earned this access. And so I don't want us to always be thinking of wealth in terms of, that's not the case. So sometimes and oftentimes it could be too. All right, other things. Why can you get ahead, or why can't you? I mean, everybody here, right? And see, this is where you might be thinking about it from a different perspective, because everybody here is paying, again, a lot of money. I don't need to remind you of that. I'm not hung up on that, but it seems critical to me that we believe that we can get ahead, but yet twice as many people just answered you can't really. And maybe you are answering most people, and most people aren't in college, right? I mean, we did look at that worldwide college thing, which was what, at the beginning, 5%? 5% of the world, you know, total goes to college. So I don't know. All right, what do you think? Why yes or why no?
So I agreed that most people can get ahead. A lot of it too is, like, I'm 27. I see a lot of the people back home who aren't doing anything, or they're making it now, and you know, they came from a baseline middle class family. I think a lot of it too is a lot of people pass up opportunity and then kind of play the victim card that like, oh, I can't do it, where it's like, you know, I'm in college now, I'm getting all kinds of emails saying, hey, apply for this scholarship, apply for this scholarship. Like, they're just handing out money to some people. I joined the military when I was 19 because I couldn't afford to go to college. One of my parents passed away. The other one was an alcoholic. So I'd said, all right, I got to make a decision. Like, what am I going to do? So, I mean, now I'm living off the GI Bill. So I think a lot of it has to do with just like a kind of a mindset that, you know, go out and network, go out and work 3 jobs if you have to, and save your money. Don't get your paycheck and then spend it on something ridiculous.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting to me because I think to myself, I don't know, like I was talking about that generational thing and how hard maybe parents are or whatever, like now it's your turn to go do this, right? But I wonder generationally, does that get less? Does it get more? Are there more parents that were like kicking people out? Because we know statistically there are more people now in their 30s, 40s, and 50s living at home than ever before. And in my generation, that was just, my parents adore me. I'm an only child, you know, I love them. And they'd still be like, Jason, we're not living with you. Like, that ain't never going to happen. So I wonder if, because you're talking about scholarships and things, I mean, I don't know if you could measure, I don't know, I don't know if you can measure laziness, you know, like, or if social conditions encourage people to be like, I'm going to make an excuse. Because you're right. Like, if we look, like when you're graduating or when you're looking to get that next thing, there's pages and pages and pages of scholarships. Like, do you really spend all those hours like digging and doing, or are we spending hours doing social networking and then saying, man, I really could have done that, but so yeah, like how do we figure in with this intensity and effort? And we know through social stratification that you start sort of where your parents or where you were born on that ladder, but then, I mean, we do have the capacity for mobility, although it's not as much. And we also know that people with absolutely nothing have sometimes have everything. But if we look at that, and so I like to look once in a while at stratification with sports, because I love sports. Sociology of sports, infinitely interesting to me. I want to write a whole book on the butt pat. you know, like the football, good job, everybody's smacking each other on the ass, right? Because it's okay in one of the most macho scenarios ever, right? Football, and everybody's crushing each other, and now we're all patting each other on the ass. It's not like you could take a test in my class, and as people leave, I could be like, good job, well done, hey, you know, that wouldn't last at all. But it's interesting to me to see what those dynamics are generationally, and I guess how they play out, and all of that. Anyway, all right, so anything else here? Agree or disagree? Most people can get ahead if they really tried. Oh, somebody here, I said agree, because many countries around the world have bad economic extreme poverty. Only a handful of people are succeed because they have limited opportunities compared to the United States. I want to say this from an outside perspective. Yeah, for sure. And that's, you know, there is a difference between a caste system and a class system. I mean, and of course, like I said before, our perception of the 1% in the United States might be the wealthy banker. But if we really flip that around, it could be us compared to the rest of the world, right? Good. All right. Anything else here? Anybody else have an opinion on this? Most people could really get ahead. Obviously, from a functionalist, what are functionalists going to say? Structural functionalist thought is going to say what about this question? Hands down. What do you think?
They would probably say yes. They would also say that the people who were poor and who weren't ahead also played a role, in that they were important for society, so that not everyone needed to get ahead.
Yeah, good, right? So there's that. Yeah, of course you could get ahead if you really tried. I mean, we set up this whole system for you. It's about you and your effort, while at the same time the system knows that they've purposely built inequalities in, so that, and it's always interesting to me because these are institutionalized, they're statistically measurable at this point because they're so unequal in some areas. But, and again, every culture does it, but it's interesting to me that the system at the same time pretends that that's not the case, right? It's got to kind of pretend that these biases don't really exist, and yes, we did set this up equally. So most people could get ahead if they really tried. What would a conflict perspective, how would the conflict perspective see this? I'm not just going to let you eat your breakfast, James, and shake your head.
From a conflict perspective, you can never get ahead, even if you tried.
And if you did, you would have to change the system, right? Like, yeah, you can, but we're going to have to make all these tweaks because we know that if it's a race, it started for some people earlier than others. And again, that's still not factoring in the fact that some people try harder. Oh, and where I was going with that college sports thing is, you know, a lot of times people get ticked off at how much people make, or that they get scholarships in school for sports. But if you've ever looked at what student athletes do, they get up at 6, they go study film, then they go lift weights for 2 hours, then they go to class for 4 hours, then they go to another film study, then they go lift weights, then they go to a team meeting. Like, honestly, you don't have the option to just sit in bed, not go to class, and get high. Those people are like really doubled down, booked, grade expectations, behavior expectations, yes sir, no sir, performance expectations. And so then there's also that piece where, you know, even in this system, people can put forth so much effort as compared to others that even if you don't have as much advantage, how hard are you working it, right? So there's some of that as well too. My friend's swimming in Hawaii and she just doesn't stop. I don't know that there is time, to stop for student athletes. And that same might be true for student musicians in ways, but not quite as intense as if you're still, you know, doing the athletic thing by the time you get to college. It's pretty crazy. All right. Anything else for today? I'm going to ask some more questions. I'll get into the chapter and we'll look at the slides a little bit more next time. Get to the discussion early and often. I know it's not, your first post isn't even due for a while, but why not? You know, why not just secure those points? You've got the example of the food paper. Get that section 1 taken care of with the listing and the stuff like that. And somebody was stressing in my other class and I said, I don't even know how to do a table. Like, and fine, look, I understand that. Just type the ingredients, you know, in a little paragraph form. You don't have to have a fancy table for it to be acceptable or anything like that. And certainly if you do have a question about in Word or something like that, how to do a table, you could reach out to me, the GTAs. I mean, you could probably even Google it because I think it is a good thing to just see them side by side to help you organize, but not required, you know. Also, if anybody has, I was just thinking of swimming at Hawaii, going to college in Hawaii and swimming. That's probably a good choice. You should be able to swim in Hawaii. My dad and I were fishing. We've done 18 years of fishing trips in the last 20 years. And I just got out of the boat and he backed up so fast because we have a flat bottom boat for catfish and you sink your lower in the back, that water started to come in. And I didn't know. And I'm walking up the shore and this kid that's fishing on the bank is like, your dad's sinking. And I'm like, huh? And I look back and my dad at the bottom of the boat, he's in the water and the boat's going like this. And my dad looks at me and he goes, I can't swim. And he's 65 years old. And I was like, what? I'm like, you should have told me you can't swim. I've known you your whole life. So I threw off my hat, jump in the water, but it's hilarious. He just looked at me like, can't swim. Just 2 words. And I'm like, son of a. So I jumped in the river, went over there, helped him dog paddle to shore. Yeah. If you could swim really good in Hawaii, you are golden. Okay, so if there's no other questions, be good people and do good things. You bring a smile to my face. Have a great weekend. Going to get really cold over the next couple of days, and then 60 degrees on Saturday, or 58 degrees, and then snow, which is going to absolutely be the key factor here in crushing these fires. So I'm putting all my positive energy into firefighters. I love firefighters. Did I tell this class that firefighters saved my life? Was it this class that I talked about? No? Oh, I had a house, my first apartment. My mom looked at it. She's like, this place is a fire trap. 3 months later, it burnt down. Yeah, I hate it when mom's right. Anyway, but I literally did wake up in the middle of the night and we had to go out on top of the roof and like escape, lost everything that I ever had. Love firefighters. Like those are some solid individuals. Your job, who is going to run in a burning building and risk their life for somebody they don't even know? Just, can you even wrap your head around it? Or go up to these, forest fires with 40-mile-an-hour winds where, I mean, you could just, that's it. You're all the time, you're putting your life out there for other people. That seems extremely compassionate to me. So let's put all of our energy into snow, even though it's October. It's Colorado. Let's get hammered by some snow, right? All right, be good people and do good things. Thanks, everybody. Please, look, reach out. We're in virtual land, and I don't want anybody floating away in space, right? I want, if you feel like you're getting disconnected, if you didn't turn in an assignment, talk to you, talk to Verena. We're here to help you. And then furthermore, I just did like a couple of Zoom sessions, like office hours yesterday, and I really enjoyed it. People had specific questions, so you can always reach out and say, hey, can we meet at this address? And that'll be our virtual office. Now has a IP address or ID address. So as weird as that sounds. All right, take care of everybody. Oh, register to vote. And voting registration deadline is actually my mom's birthday, October 26th, if you're in Colorado. So make sure that you vote. I think the Bears play Monday Night Football on that Monday night. That is the voting deadline. Bear down. I don't think we're a for real 5-1, but I'm just going to enjoy it right now. Take care, everybody. Peace.